Hey party people. So today I wanted to talk to you guys about Texas government. First of all, we have two classes. You got federal, you got Texas, you have the judiciary in both, but we're just going to be talking about Texas. I wanted to do this video because the judiciary here in Texas can kind of be confusing. We have what's called a dual judiciary, okay? So write that down. It consists of the Texas Supreme Court and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, okay? On the Texas Supreme Court, they only see juvenile cases. So we're talking a kid did something and was not tried as an adult, and civil cases. So a civil case, we'll talk about that in a minute, is not the same as a criminal case. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has jurisdiction over all death penalty cases, like immediate jurisdiction over all death penalty cases, and any other criminal case where everybody involved is an adult, okay? So make sure you know that whenever it asks you what can be seen at the Supreme Court, or in this case, it'll give you maybe a case, and you have to choose, does it go to the Supreme Court? Does it go to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals? You'll just have to figure it out. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between criminal and civil cases. A civil case, I want to write this down. Civil cases are when an individual brings charges against another individual or entity, or a company brings charges against another individual or company. Okay, so let's say my neighbor's kid comes over and jumps on my trampoline, and their kid breaks their leg. She could then sue me because maybe I don't have a net. Or maybe she's not even mad at me, but she needs medical bill help and my housing insurance will pay for it, right? So she has to sue me in order to get that money. You may have heard about a case a few years ago of an aunt that sued her sister, and everybody's like, oh, it's the worst aunt in the world. Well, it's because when she went to her sister's house, she went to go visit her nephew. I think her nephew was having a birthday or something. Anyway, nephew comes up, hugs her real tight, and I don't know if this child is taking steroids or what, but he broke her clavicle. And so, or maybe she just has brittle bones. I don't know. I'm not about that life. But she needed help with the medical bills. And here's the thing. With housing insurance, they will pay if somebody gets injured on your property, right? So she had to sue her sister, and it became a whole national thing, and it really was not what it seemed. But you have to do that sometimes, right? So that's an individual bringing it against an individual. You also have other civil cases where maybe you've seen Aaron Brockovich, where you had a bunch of people who bring a case against a company. If you have lots of people, that's called a class action lawsuit, but we talk about that more in federal government. But either way, it means something happened and you are pissed off at someone else. Probably the biggest civil case that you've heard of is divorce. So you're going to have somebody suing for divorce. When you file for divorce, that's called suing for divorce. A lot of people don't realize that that's what that is, but that's what it is. So you're bringing charges against someone else because you either want to dissolve the marriage, you want alimony, you want child support, etc., etc. But this is all a civil case, okay? Somebody trespasses on your property. Somebody poisons your dog. Why would anybody do that? Just terrible. Anyway, those are all civil cases. Now, write this down. In a civil case, the burden of proof is what makes it different from civil to criminal as well. The burden of proof for a civil case is preponderance of the evidence. That just means that you have to have enough evidence to say that this person could have possibly done that or probably did that. Okay, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It just means there's more evidence to support what you are saying this person did than that person has to say that they did not do that thing, right? So that's kind of the biggest differences between civil and criminal case. So civil case is going to have an individual or a corporation bring charges against another individual or corporation. And also the preponderance of evidence is what the threshold is, just enough, right? So like 50% plus one or something, Now, criminal cases. very different. A criminal case is when the state or the federal government, so some sort of government entity, is bringing charges against you. Okay? So this is where it doesn't matter whether someone wants to press charges or not. For instance, you robbed a bank. Probably don't even do that. And did you know if you rob a bank with online fraud, that automatically becomes federal? And that's no. So, because it crosses state lines, right? So in order for something to be criminal, something has happened that has made it to where the state is going to bring charges against you, or the federal government is going to. Usually it kind of stays as a state case depending upon what happened. If you cross state lines, so let's say you kidnapped somebody and took them to Oklahoma. Okay, well, now you've crossed state lines. That makes it a different type of case, but it's still criminal. If you stole a whole bunch of money online, that's going to make it a different kind of case. Still criminal. But let's say you knocked off a liquor store, that's going to be state. And it depends on how much you stole as well, because it could just be, taken care of in your local area. Who knows? But criminal cases, the burden of proof, make sure that you know this, it means beyond a reasonable doubt, okay? This is where that jury trial comes in, and if even one person dissents, then you can be acquitted. That's why a lot of people will say, hey, always go to trial. You will have plenty of time to explain yourself at trial. Okay. A lot of people will not have enough money to go to trial. Maybe they don't have an attorney. Maybe they have a public defender. And so that's where we enter into plea deals. Write that down. It is a vocabulary word. A plea deal is when the prosecutor says, hey, we have all this evidence against you, man. You could get 25 to life. We're going to put you away forever. And the most innocent person might be like, oh, well, that doesn't sound very good. It's flies. That doesn't sound very good. And they say, you know what though? If you'll just plead guilty, this works well for them because they get you off the docket and they don't have to deal with your case anymore, which means they can go on to another case and make more money. They don't want to have to deal with yours. And so they'll say, if you just plead guilty to a lower count of maybe manslaughter, then you know what? We'll just ask for 10 years, maybe 15, and you'll probably be out earlier. I mean, you'll be eligible for parole in 6. And you think, well, but I'm innocent. But if I go to trial and they convict me, that's 25 to life. And we have seen that happen. We've seen it with the Innocence Project. If you're not familiar with that, it's a nonprofit organization that helps people oftentimes that didn't have decent lawyers. They were jailed for a longer period than they should have been. New evidence has come out since they were convicted that has exonerated them, etc. And so they just have really good lawyers that go and they help these people. So oftentimes with those plea deals, they might be good. And if you are a guilty person, that's probably good for you. But if you're innocent, you might be pressured into it. So make sure you understand that. But it's beyond a reasonable doubt. If there is any way that there is some sort of doubt that you did not do what you did, or they say you did, what you're being accused of, then they can't put you in jail, okay? This leads me to double jeopardy. Write this down because people get this confused all the time. If you haven't seen the movie Double Jeopardy with Ashley Judd, highly recommend. It's, I believe, filmed in the 90s or something. It's a really good movie. It's about this dude who ends up disappearing off of a boat or a cruise ship or something. Anyway, he fakes his own death and his wife gets popped for it and ends up going to prison. And then she finally gets out, finds him with well, I'm not going to spoiler alert, but anyway, but she couldn't go back to jail for murder because she had already been convicted and put in jail for murder. Now, keep in mind, if you are arrested, you can be tried in state and federal court, depending upon what it is, okay? That's not double jeopardy. Double jeopardy is when you can't be tried for the exact same crime in the exact same court, okay? So that's why you have the likes of Jeffrey Epstein, who was tried in Florida for child trafficking and all of that, which that's a whole other corrupt situation with the prosecutors and the judge, and totally looked that case up, illuminating. But he was also prosecuted for the same type of crime in New York because he had a island, I guess, in Florida, and then he had like a mansion or something in New York. Anyway, it was two different things. It's the same type of crime, but he can be tried in two different places because it's two different things. Anyway, you can also be tried criminally and civilly. That's not a weird thing. In fact, it happens quite often. So think O.J. Simpson. If you don't know who the Juice is, well, congratulations. You must be very young. However, O.J. Simpson, he was acquitted of murdering his wife. Side note, for all of us who are old enough to remember, homeboy did it. But anyway, he was acquitted. And so therefore he got off on murder charges. That being said, the family of his wife took him to court and sued him for wrongful death and won. The reason is because in that family case, that's a civil lawsuit. It was wrongful death. And so they won because the preponderance of evidence was as such that it just had to be, or the evidence was preponderance of the evidence. So it means it just had to be more than half. Like, it's probable that this person did it, right? It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So they won. So you can be tried in multiple courts and multiple ways, both civil and criminal, and that is not double jeopardy. So make sure that you know that. Generally, the punishment for a criminal case is either a fine or jail time or both. In a civil case, you're talking more monetary stuff, that's not going to be, you're not going to go to jail for murdering your friend's dog or something, although I think maybe you should. But anyway, so let's talk about how we get to this court, right? Write this down. When you first start out, you're going to start out as a trial court. That's going to be the first place you go. So in order to get to a trial court, you have to go through a few things. First of all, you're going to have a grand jury, okay? This is a jury that doesn't determine if you're guilty or innocent. The only thing a grand jury does is they say, you know what? This person has a lot of evidence against them, okay? If you're thinking of famous grand juries right now, you're probably thinking of a certain previous president, maybe down in Georgia. Anytime you hear of indictments for politicians or regular people, it doesn't matter what, it is not the prosecutor who is the bad guy. It's the fact that not that there's any bad guy, but it's the fact that a jury of their peers looked at all the evidence set forth by the state and said, wow, that's pretty bad. And so what they did was they said, okay, grand jury puts forth an indictment. It's called a true bill. Write that down. True bill. That's also known as an indictment. And so in the case of Georgia and the previous president, they had a special grand jury. Georgia does things a little bit differently. We don't really do that in Texas, but you go to a special grand jury and then they say, yeah, this is a lot of evidence. This is crazy. And so then they put it to a proper grand jury. And then that grand jury was like, yeah, dude, all these people need to be indicted. And then all of them got indicted, okay? So keep that in mind. You got to go to the grand jury first. And the only thing the grand jury decides is whether or not there's enough evidence to take you to trial, okay? Now, next step, we're going to go to trial. Provided you don't make a plea bargain, you go to trial. Now, this is where if you're in a criminal case, you're going to have beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Now, let's say you lose that trial, but you're like, no. It's because somebody was wearing purple mascara and just didn't like me. Okay, you'd probably have to prove something more than that, but still. However, let's say that you appeal it, and just because you appeal does not mean the next court up has to hear it. And also, keep in mind, it costs money. So a lot of people will appeal, but then they can't pay for it, right? So just make sure you know, nothing is free, okay? Even public defenders, taxpayers are paying for those. So You go to an appellate court, write that down, an appellate court, also known as an appeals court. Okay, so a trial court would be like a district court. Okay, it's that first court that's going to hear your case. Write this down. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is what the court is allowed to hear. It's sort of their sphere of power, if you will. And so jurisdiction for the first court to hear your case is going to be that trial court. Then the next court up is going to be an appellate court. It's an appeals court. Write this down. An appellate court does not determine if you're guilty or innocent. It only determines whether or not you had a fair trial. Now, you have a couple of famous cases here in Texas where it went to the appellate court and ended up actually in the United States Supreme Court. And it ended up they did not get fair trials, or they used judicial review, which we'll talk about in a second. So the appellate court says, hey, this person did not have a fair trial. Let's use Hernandez versus Texas for this. It's in your book. It's one of your main court cases, so write this down. Hernandez versus Texas. Hernandez was accused of murder. He was Latino, but at the time, Texas did not allow Latinos to serve on juries. And so he appealed his case up to the Supreme Court. The reason why it could go to the United States Supreme Court is because it's a civil rights case. Write that down. Civil rights cases can be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. So SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. So that was why he could get his appeal all the way up there. The Supreme Court ruled that Texas was unconstitutional by not allowing Latinos to serve on juries because they were discriminating against people based on ethnicity, and that's not okay. So once Texas fixed their stuff and decided to go back and give him a new trial, he was acquitted immediately because he was innocent and the evidence against him was flimsy at best. And so because he proved that he did not get a fair trial in the first place, then he was acquitted and they changed the law. Anytime the Supreme Court of the United States makes an edict, it changes the law in every state, okay? So for this one, it changed the law in every state that wasn't allowing Latinos or that was discriminating for any reason as far as ethnicity. None of those states could do that anymore. So it started in Texas, but it has riveting effects throughout the rest of the United States. Another one, when we talk about judicial review, would be Lawrence versus Texas. This is another one of your major cases in the book, so make sure that you write this down. Judicial review is a vocabulary word, and it means that the Supreme Court is going to look at a law that a state has and determine whether or not it is constitutional or it's not constitutional. Cool. So in this particular case, Lawrence versus Texas was about anti-sodomy laws. So back in the day, and I mean back in the day up until 2003, this was still a thing when I was in high school, okay? So 2003 is when we finally got Lawrence versus Texas on the books, but before that, it was illegal to be gay. They could literally arrest you, and that's what happened with Lawrence. So he appealed his case. He said that the law was unconstitutional. He should not be jailed for being gay. It's just, life, and that's not fair. Appealed it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court agreed with him. And so therefore it got rid of all anti-sodomy laws and made being gay legal in America, not just Texas. Because remember, if it comes down from SCOTUS, it's going to go all over like a rash. But there was about 13 states. I'm sure you can guess which ones that had anti-sodomy laws. So they're all kind of pissed off that now they couldn't just go and arrest gay people. Okay. Now then, that does not mean that gay marriage was allowed. That didn't actually happen until 2016. So all of these things are so new. Things that we take for granted, especially if you're younger and you're just out of high school or you're only a couple of years out of high school, you think, oh, we've always had these things. No, these are new, and we have to fight to keep our rights. Look at Roe versus Wade. It was just overturned. I've never been in a situation where Roe was not on the books. So for me, I kind of just took it for granted, like, oh yeah, well, they can't make these laws because it's against Roe. And then they overturned Roe. So keep in mind, all of our laws that protect you, you have to work to protect those laws because those laws are not set in stone all the time, okay? So with Lawrence versus Texas, that went as an appellate case, okay? They said that law, they used judicial review, that law is unconstitutional. With Hernandez versus Texas, they said he did not get a fair trial. So those trial courts determine if you're guilty or innocent. Those appellate courts are going to determine if you had a fair trial. If the appellate court says that you did not have a fair trial, it puts it back down to the trial court. It does not exonerate you. And then you start all over. So I hope this helps. There's a whole lot more in the chapter, but I don't want this to go on forever. I just wanted to give you an overview of some highlights. Make sure you're reading everything. Make sure you're reading all the little boxes. And if you have any questions, email me. Let me know.